Hi, everybody.
Hello.
We are back this week and we've got something exciting. We've got someone exciting with us. Richard Pallardy, the author of No Dog is an Island, is joining us. And we'll give him a proper introduction in a minute, but we're going to chat and let people join first for a little bit.
I will mention this is the first time we've had a third person join us for the Facebook Live event, which is exciting. Usually we talk all about the authors, but now he can defend himself.
Thank you for joining us, Richard.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful.
Our pleasure. And as we're letting people filter in and sit down and get comfortable, I just wanted to chat about one of the themes of your story is this connection between humankind and ancient animals via pets. And I thought I would just pose the question to the group to say, if you could have any ancient animal as a pet, what would it be?
Richard, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll take that one. When you sent me that question, it definitely took me a minute to land on the proper species. I mean, there are so many choices out there, and I decided that I was going to go with something very practical in this fantasy world. I decided trilobites. I would like to have a tank of trilobites. And I mean, I'm living in an apartment, so, I can't have, a saber-toothed tiger or anything like that. I thought that seemed interesting, fun to watch, relatively practical. They presumably could not get out and do any damage, probably easy to feed. They're bottom feeders, at least from my understanding. I thought that could be like a cool, like little set piece in my apartment. Yeah.
Nice.
I love that. You can't have a live trilobite, but you could have a trilobite fossil, which.
True. Yeah, exactly.
But one of our previous contributors, one of his most prized possessions actually is a trilobite fossil.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think I gave somebody a trilobite fossil as a gift. I don't know if they still have it.
Nice gift choice.
It's a good gift choice.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe coelacanth, but since they are still alive, but I mean they're so big, right, and they live at such depth. I don't think that they've ever been successfully captured alive and kept in captivity, as far as I know. Anyway, I've seen them like specimens in museums, but yeah, I've never seen a live one.
We're definitely going to talk about coelacanths later because they come up in your story.
Yes.
And it's funny that you mentioned saber-toothed tiger, because that was one of the first things that came to my mind as well. Because I thought if I'm going to have an ancient pet, I want it to be kind of badass and big, but then right. I also don't want to be mauled. So yeah, I've been thinking about this too. Like what could be big? What could really feel exciting in terms of having megafauna in my life that's no longer on Earth? And so I was thinking maybe giant sloth.
Oh,
I could still get mauled by a giant sloth, but I feel like it would partially be my fault if that happens. I mean, they used to be the size of elephants.
Right.
They were massive. Right. And they lived in South America and the southern part of Bolivia, which I like. And I guess that was maybe tens of thousands of years ago. So perhaps the climate has shifted a little bit. But if I had to relocate to give proper habitat to my giant sloth pets, I'd be cool going to South America.
Yeah. Oh man, what would you do about habitat for those guys? Have you ever seen they still some places they still have like the burrows that they created? You can go in them.
No way.
Oh, wow.
Like you can actually still see like the claw marks like on the side of like these huge, like they look like caves, but they found out that they were actually burrows that these animals created, which you wouldn't think of something that enormous creating a burrow. Like you think they'd just be walking around like an elephant or something, but apparently they did.
Crazy. I did not know that.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. I also think about the people who first discovered these caves with these giant claw marks on the side. That's kind of
like, what must they have thought was hanging around there?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Wild. Yeah, in terms of habitat, I don't know, because I would also feel bad just having one because I'd want them to have friends. And then
Right.
this is how this would just snowball out of control. So I tried not to think about it too much because I just wanted to embrace the giant sloth idea, but I'm sure there might be challenges. I might just start like a giant sloth foundation. I don't know. All come together. All of us who have our giant sloth pets could come together and they could all be friends and we could
Right.
habitat or something. We'd make it work.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what my sister and I always talk about, how we would love to have a capybara, but then we found out that they really like company, so you really have to have like 2 or 3 of them. And I'm like, I mean, one is a lot, but like 3 capybaras, like you really have to have some space there.
For people listening who don't know what a capybara is, can you fill them in, Richard?
Sure. So they're I believe they are the largest living rodent, and they live in South America in like kind of wetland habitats, and I would say about the size of like a medium-sized dog, and I would argue one of the cuter animals out there, and people do keep them as pets, which I think probably is debated as to whether or not you should be keeping an exotic animal, but they're apparently very friendly. They love being like scratched and petted. And they're the reason that my sister and I love them so much is there is a children's book called Cappy Boppy, and it's by Bill Peet, who was one of the early Disney illustrators. And it's about like the story of him and his family having gotten a capybara and just all those little antics that it got up to. So that's my the source of my love for them.
It's a dangerous children's book.
Right? I know that.
Yeah.
Then the kid is like, I want one. Here we go. Savani, what about you and your ancient pet?
So my first instinct was just because I love dinosaurs that I wanted a dinosaur of some point, but that's not very practical for the most part. There were some exceptions, but I decided to keep it hyper local. And I went with something that was only ever found, as far as we know, here on the Channel Islands here, which was the pygmy mammoth. So yeah, so they started off as mammoths, as far as we know, and made their swim across to the Channel Islands, and then as resources somewhat depleted, they started to shrink in size. So they went from the 14-foot tall, 20,000-pound mammoths to 4.5 to 7 feet tall and like 2,000 pounds. And right around, I think they were around until kind of the late Cretaceous. And yeah, so that's what I went with. Also because I love elephants, and so that seemed like a good option.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know there are a couple other unique species that are native to the Channel Islands. There's a still living species of fox, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, so the photo feature in this current issue is about the Channel Islands, and I joked when we were talking about that, the Channel Islands are right there. I can see them from my office. So yeah, there are actually quite a few endemic species to the Channel Islands. I think they estimate at this point about 145 endemic species on the Channel Islands. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool. I didn't really know that either, until Alex pitched the story, and we went down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a cool place. I mean, I went because I grew up near here, and so it's a place that's kind of always been part of just the landscape, and as much as I thought I knew about it, I didn't know nearly as much about it as I thought I did, and so it was fun to go down that rabbit hole and to learn about this place that I see every day, pretty much.
I've heard that there's like some interesting like scuba diving opportunities there, because there's some kind of unique habitats.
Yeah, the kelp forests and all that. So yeah, it's a really neat place. And the Channel Islands National Park, half of the park is underwater. That's also what's protected there. I mean, so yeah, there's definitely a lot happening under the surface of the ocean as well as on the islands themselves.
Cool.
Well, let's take this moment to formally introduce Richard Pallardy. Now that we know what kind of ancient animal he would keep as a pet, So Richard is a science writer based in Chicago, also a research editor. You're research editor for 7 years, was it, at Encyclopedia Britannica?
I was, yeah.
Nice. And you write for Earth.com, you write about evolution, you write about animals and plants and how they interact, and you've covered a ton of subjects in your career. So we could go into a lot of detail about all the different ground you've covered, but I just want to get a taste of perhaps some of the most quirky or interesting subjects, or the subjects you really enjoyed covering for your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my preoccupations is invasive species. I find just the whole process of quote unquote invading an environment to be totally fascinating. So I've done pieces on a number of different species of plants and animals that have been introduced by humans, and just the stories of how like these animals were able to either adapt to the environment and integrate into it relatively seamlessly, or on the other hand come in and disrupt things and create problems in the environment is really interesting. I think one of my favorites that I did was on the African clawed frog, which I don't know if people remember. I think they may still be available, but when I was a kid, they had these Grow a Frog kits. Like they would sell them at like the Discovery type stores, and like even like teaching stores, and basically it was like a little tank, and then you sent away for a tadpole, and the tadpole would metamorphosize and become a fully aquatic frog. So I mean, it was pretty easy to keep, but these actually started out as research animals. They were one of the early ways of conducting pregnancy tests, actually. So that they would like introduce like a sample from a woman who wanted to know if she was pregnant into the water, and if the frogs would spawn, that would mean that she was pregnant, because they were reacting to like the human hormones.
Oh wow.
But they were relatively easy to keep in captivity, which is why they became pets. But then when they were released into the wild, they overtook some environments. I think they're almost on every continent now, and they reproduce really quickly. They're very adaptable. While they are aquatic, they can kind of jump over land for short periods. And they are thought to be the origin of the chytrid fungus, which is like devastating amphibian populations around the world. And apparently they're immune to it. So they're sort of like the typhoid Marys of the amphibian world. And I mean, that's become a huge problem, especially in places like South America. Some of these really, endangered amphibians are at risk of like total extinction because of this. So it's this very like interesting like chain reaction, that like almost like butterfly effect kind of phenomenon. And I found that really interesting to research, and just kind of underscored how little we as humans know about how we affect our environment. Something that seemingly is so inconsequential, like had such huge ripple effects.
Wow. Yeah.
Was it they were escaping from the Grow a Frog kits and then just took over?
Or people just releasing them, or?
Yeah, my sense was that people were releasing them. I think some like labs released them, like they either like went out of business or no longer had any reason for them. I believe, not sure if it's still there, but there was a pond at Berkeley that was just like swarming with them, like on the campus, because I think like one of the labs shut down and they just dumped them all in the pond. And I think that remained like relatively self-contained, because there wasn't like a nearby body of water for them to migrate to, but like people could go there and just see these things like swarming in there.
Wow.
So I'm based in Berkeley, and there's some crazy things that happen in our ponds, I will tell you.
Really? What else have you seen?
Well, I reported a story when I was at California Magazine. I reported a story on this neurotoxic algae that was appearing. It was appearing in Northern California too, but also in, one of the small lakes, just about 10 minutes from my house, actually. And most toxic algal blooms, they aren't neurotoxic. They affect mostly like your liver and so on, but these went straight to the brain and created aneurysms.
Whoa.
So it's some pretty crazy stuff. And I got to interview this postdoc at Berkeley who was into cyanobacteria, and his whole research was on this kind of cyanobacteria. This was his moment in the spotlight. Everyone's like, what is happening with this neurotoxic algae? And this one postdoc was like, I study this. So that was really fun to interview him. But I just remember after that thinking, just kind of looking twice at the ponds in Berkeley.
Right. Did that just kind of like spontaneously arise there? Like some kind of like confluence of special conditions?
So yeah, the hypothesis is that during these crazy droughts we've been having in California, it's creating conditions that allow certain types of algae to just explode. Water levels are going down, and then you see these toxic algal blooms all over the place. And it has to do with low amounts of water and high amounts of heat and oxygen levels, and it's creating these toxic ponds through drought in the state.
Wow, interesting. Because I hadn't heard of that happening in freshwater. I know, obviously like red tides and saltwater. Some of those I think even have caused like health problems for people because some of that stuff gets airborne and causes like breathing problems. I think that happened like down in Florida like a couple years ago.
Yeah,
I will plug.
A lot of them are being fertilized by runoff from agriculture, and so you get these massive blooms sometimes.
Yeah, not all cyanobacteria are bad though. They're part of the ecosystem, and it's ecosystem imbalance is good, and it's just the imbalance of the ecosystem that causes aneurysms. So don't hate on cyanobacteria.
I'm having a problem with them actually. Currently, I have my one pet right now is just a fish tank, and there's a cyanobacteria bloom in there right now. So I'm trying to keep on top of that. And interestingly, I was doing research, nothing eats it. So like I was like, oh, should I get like some snails or something? And they're like, I mean, you can, but it's not going to do anything. Like, so you just have to kind of like keep scooping it out until you get like the water balanced exactly right.
Yeah. Well, and as someone who has covered invasive species, you probably know certain circumstances where humans think, oh, I'll solve this problem by introducing another animal, and then
unforeseen circumstances.
That absolutely never goes well. I mean, like look at like the cane toad in Australia, which I've never written about, but I mean that's a huge problem there, or even our foxes there, which were I believe introduced on purpose for hunting, and they're a huge problem for the native wildlife.
Right.
Best of intentions. Right?
Well, let's segue into this story, because I love this story, and I was excited about it when we saw the first pitch. But one of the questions I always am really interested to hear is, for journalists and storytellers and writers, how do these things even end up on your radar? So how did this story end up on your radar initially?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's see, say maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I had stumbled across just some reference to them, and had I think it might have been like when they got the first photographs that in like decades, and I had seen a news story about that and kind of filed that away in the back of my brain, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I started working for this publication, Earth.com, and they gave me a lot of latitude in terms of what I could write. So I pitched them that idea. I just kind of wanted to do a deep dive and see like what was known about these dogs, and just like kind of plunder the literature for some interesting material on them. So I did that, and I wrote, I don't know, it was maybe like a 1,500, 2,000 word piece that just kind of summarized the history of these dogs, like what was known about them when they had first been discovered, when they were first, brought into captivity. and published that, and I was pleased with it, and just kind of forgot about it and moved on. And then maybe it might have been like 3 or 4 months later, maybe a little bit longer, James McIntyre, who is the researcher that is the focus of my Hidden Compass piece, reached out to me, and he's pretty much the only guy researching these dogs, and he runs the New Guinea Highland Wild Dog Foundation. So I don't know if he had like a Google or something set up, or had just been seeing, what else was out there about these dogs. And he emailed me and was like, oh, I'm like really happy with this article. Like, it kind of like dispels some of like the myths that are out there, and he was pleased with it. And he kind of gave me like a little taste of this new research that was coming out. And so when he did that, I was like, oh, I really want to cover that. Like, keep me posted, like loop me in with like your colleagues. And it kind of snowballed from there. And we had a bunch of conversations, and talked to some of the people that he was working with. And yeah, so that was kind of the genesis of the piece.
Nice.
That's really cool to have truly an expert in the field reach out to you about your reporting and allow you to go even deeper.
Yeah, that was really gratifying. And like the fact that he was kind of willing to trust me with this, like, it was probably like a year out before like the research was published. So it was actually still in process. And like, that was just kind of moving in a way that he would trust me with this, essentially like his life's work at this point, and like give me some insights, and trust me not to, not go off the rails and, scoop them on it.
Right.
Yeah, that's huge. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know I was going to say something similar. So when we saw this, I mean, that was also something that was really exciting for us about this story, was that there was still research ongoing. There was stuff that there was information that we were waiting for and waiting to see published before we ran the story. And so that whole process for us was really interesting. And we knew that this story, from the moment we saw the pitch, had huge potential as a Hidden Compass story, right? It was our perfect combination of diving into that science, and it was a mystery, and it was nerdy, and it was evocative. It was all of those things that we love. But I want to know how you came to place this story with us. What made you think this was a Hidden Compass story?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because there are so many angles that I could take with this story. And I was really open to exploring any and all of them. So, of course, with Hidden Compass, like a good part of the appeal was sort of the like adventure component about this. Like, we just don't hear very much anymore in contemporary science of people exploring places that are so unknown. I mean, we have like the deep sea or like Antarctica or something like that, but everything, or I shouldn't say everything, but so much of the world has been mapped and has been explored. And certainly there are ecosystems that we don't know as much about as we do others, say North American forests, or even like the Serengeti, these really like iconic places. So I think the fact that all this took place in New Guinea, which is just so poorly explored, like it's so remote. I think that was part of what drew me to Hidden Compass for that part of the story. And I will also say that this was just the story in general was very difficult to place, because there is some controversy about just how important exactly this dog is in an evolutionary sense. And what's interesting is, this new research that came out last year has really kind of solidified that and said that, this is really an important evolutionary entity. But prior to that, there was really a sense in the research community that, or at least a good portion of the research community, that this dog was not necessarily very significant. That a lot of people just considered it this feral dog, and that it's just kind of like any other feral dog around the world. The fact that they were able to trace this back and say that this is like really primitive, almost like living fossil, it was kind of gratifying that I had gotten insights from McIntyre and through my own research that said to me pretty clearly that this was something significant. So yeah, I did a bunch of pitching, looking around, and I did end up placing one other story about the dog that has yet to come out. That's a little bit more about the controversy aspect of it. But yeah, it was. It seems like such a good fit with sort of really like rarefied environment that this whole saga played out in.
Yeah, we thought it was a great fit too. And it's interesting that pieces like this can be difficult to place because we're actually excited about the pieces that can't just be tied up in a neat little bow and everything.
Right.
Everyone agrees about what it all means. I mean, the stories I'm most excited to publish are the ones where there are different interpretations about the meaning and the significance of research and the science to it. And we were excited about the cinematic side to this too. You know, I mean, you obviously have a background in writing about science, and we knew that you had good, deep knowledge about the subject, and we were excited to push it into the cinematic narrative that was waiting. Like you said, this is a landscape that's just begging to come to life in this kind of story. And that angle of not just covering the significant scientific breakthrough, but the environment in which it occurs is one that we think is perfect for us, and that we love to read as well, those kinds of stories, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I also we also, one of the things that we latched onto, and what we often latch onto, are these mysteries that surround things that we think we know already, and in this case, you know, dogs, and an animal that we thought we knew, and having such a significant mystery around their origins, and you know, I think we both believed at that point that we thought domestic dogs were descended from wolves.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to dig into a mystery about something we thought we knew was really exciting as well on our end.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that whole area of research is just absolutely fascinating. It's so contentious. There are so many theories about, you know, the origins of the domestic dog and how exactly that played out, and, you know, when it happened, where it happens. I think kind of the general sense now is that it probably happened multiple times in multiple places around the world, and that however, at a certain point, I want to say dogs from East Asia kind of took over, you know, through trading and stuff, and kind of obliterated a lot of these like earlier versions of the domestic dog. And the other interesting thing is that while dogs are probably originated from a species of wolf, they're not the gray wolf that we know today. So actually the gray wolf, you know, which, you know, is found in, you know, Europe and parts of Asia and North America, is probably descended from the same animal that the domestic dog is descended from. So they actually have a common ancestor, rather than it being like a gray wolf directly giving us the dogs we know today.
That was certainly surprising for me to read, and exciting too, that there wasn't just this linear progression, but that there are all these different lineages and missing elements and puzzle pieces. Which leads me, I have a question for you, Richard, about that first scene, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty still about the origin story. And, you know, you have these elements of the research that gives you points of reference, right? But as a writer, you have to connect that constellation. And there was a lot of uncertainty, and yet you were able to bring it to life. And I love that first scene. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, that was a really interesting process. So I had kind of mapped out through my research where likely these dogs originated from, which is the theory right now is South China. And I think that it rests on a couple things. Notably, there's a jawbone, I think, found at like in an archaeological dig that had, I don't know if they did genetic analysis or if it was just kind of like appearance, but that linked the Highland wild dogs to the mainland. But then there is an element of geography, which is not totally my strength, and not only like current geography, but prehistoric geography, because some of these regions did not look like they look now. So, for example, New Guinea is an island. However, there was I was like, well, was there a land bridge? Because there was a land bridge connecting New Guinea to Australia at one point, but I didn't know if there was one that connected New Guinea to mainland Asia. And as far as I was able to determine, there was not. I think there were some denser island chains than there are now. So that really is what led me to situate the dogs on the boats coming with people, because the likelihood of the dogs having swum from island to island and gotten all the way to New Guinea seemed so much lower than it did coming over with these early people who colonized New Guinea in their boats. And especially with that artifact having been found in South China, it suggested that these dogs were in some state of domestication prior to having come over there. So that was the other thing that I really loved about the story, is that I think it illustrates that the boundary between domesticity and wildness is very permeable, because as readers will find out if they read the piece, whether or not these dogs actually came over with people or not, they are now fully wild animals. They have their own pack structure. They subsist completely on food that they hunt, and have lived up there for thousands of years. So the fact that an animal could spend some time with humans and then revert back to the wild, I thought was a really interesting concept.
Yeah, definitely. And being these dogs that escaped into the mists, being kind of on the edge of human knowledge and yet interacting with humans over time. I mean, we should say that though the scientific research of this particular species was lacking for so much time, local people had relationships with this dog.
Absolutely, yeah. These dogs would be hunted and by some tribes for food. They would also be captured by other tribes and used as hunting dogs. And they have done genetic research on some of the village dogs that are still used by some of these subsistence hunters who still live up in the mountains, and some of them do have New Guinea Highland wild dog blood in them. So I think that's another interesting aspect of that, is that European dogs later came over, and so there's much more European dog blood in these village dogs. But prior to that point, I mean, it's entirely possible that they may have been largely relying on these dogs captured from the wild to help them in their hunting practices.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting though. So New Guinea is split between two countries. The western side of the island is West Papua, which is run by Indonesia, and then the east side of the island is Papua New Guinea, which is its own independent country. And the groups that live on each side treat the dogs in different ways. So one side, I believe, the Papuan side treats them more as like a game animal, and there's some interesting significance in hunting them, and their bones have sort of like religious and symbolic value, and whereas the other side of the island, the people there kind of revere the dogs and would not consider hunting them or killing them.
That is so fascinating to me, how many different perspectives we can have of the same animal and different relationships, from from prey to pets to object of scientific study, and how we can hop back and forth based on sometimes very little knowledge between stances of, oh, this is an animal that's incredibly important and part of these lineages of our dogs, to, well, it's just another kind of dog that happens to be a bit more wild than the others.
Yeah.
I wanted to also oh, sorry, Siv, go ahead.
Good.
I also wanted to talk about the humans in the story.
Yes.
And you mentioned that Dr. McIntyre, Mac, reached out to you to collaborate on the story. And so I want to know about how that partnership progressed and what it was like working with him on the story.
Yeah, so yeah, he's a very interesting guy. So and one interesting thing about him is that he doesn't actually have a doctorate. He has a bachelor's, I believe in biology, but he was actually connected to these dogs when he was working at a private endangered species breeding center in Florida, and this other gentleman, pardon me, was visiting the center, and the center was I guess it was some place that zoos would kind of send their animals to if they were having a trouble breeding them, like in the actual zoo itself. And because they had so much more property at the center, gave the animals more privacy. They could be more comfortable. They weren't around humans all the time, so they had greater success in breeding them. And he was working there. And this gentleman, his name's Laird Brisbane, was very interested in these dogs, and McIntyre, he had heard, was going over to Vanuatu, an island, and there were rumors that the dogs may have been there, and McIntyre was actually studying a population of pigs. And this guy, Brisbane, was like, well, if I give you some extra money, will you go take a look around and see if the dogs might be there? So he did. And that was kind of his entry into that area of study. So I guess that's a little bit of background, not quite answering your question, but in terms of actually interacting with McIntyre, he's a very engaging guy. Like, just like his enthusiasm for these animals it's kind of infectious. And he's so passionate about finding out more about them and working on their conservation. So yeah, just talking to him is an interesting process in terms of interviewing, I guess. I'm sure both of you know, having interviewed people, like, some people are a little bit more reticent and you have to draw them out and, prod them with questions and stuff. And this was kind of one of those situations where, you ask a question or two and then, 45 minutes later, you still haven't gotten to your second question. So he's very much a storyteller. Like, he loves telling this story. He loves talking about his experiences. And like at a certain point, I almost had to just be like, okay, well, like, I kind of give up on like my, some of my questions and just let him run with it and like let him direct the conversation in a certain way. And then, circle back if there's something that I missed or that I needed. But it developed very, very organically and easily. He was a very easy guy to talk to. And I believe he also worked as a high school track coach. So he's very, he has, I guess, a good like pedagogical sense. Like, he's very good at explaining things. I think he worked as a substitute teacher too, I think. So yeah, he just has that kind of natural storytelling ability and ability to kind of weave the science into, kind of an adventure story. So he made that part of it easier than it might have been with another type of researcher.
It is always interesting when you have when you're interviewing people, different people react a different way. And I think some of the best interviews are the ones where they just kind of control, the person you're interviewing takes control and leads you down this into the story and just takes you with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it was interesting talking to him too, because in contrast, I did earlier the last year I did also did a story on urban coyotes and another canine, and I've ran in or interviewed this one researcher who was so like the opposite of him, was so like kind of like she was super good at what she did and very interesting person, but also like kind of like I don't know, I want to say like maybe like prickly or abrasive, like, and was like every time I would ask a question, she'd be like, "Oh, that's the wrong question. Like that, like like you need to know this in order to even be able to ask a good question," which was great actually. Like I like that kind of interview too, because I'm like, oh well, kind of dissolved some of my preconceived notions and gave me some new direction. But like it was a little like edgier of a process. Like I'm like, oh, I don't want to like step on toes here, or and I want to make sure I'm getting her perspective right. And in contrast to this, where it just was so like fluid and easy and natural.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also for a story like this, you need so much detail because you're bringing the scenes to life. And then there's the other element of this research is unpublished during the time that you're having these interviews. And so to have that trust is essential.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about, we talked about the humans in the story and we talked about the dogs in the story, but there's also a separate sort of relationship, the dogs and the humans. And sort of the connection of these dogs to what most of us would consider pets. And not every writer would make the connection between the New Guinea Highland wild dog and the coelacanth, but it works really well in this story. And so for those who might not know a little bit about this ancient fish, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So for, I believe, I want to say it was 1936 or 1946. I'm not sure, but of the exact year, but it was middle of the 20th century. We thought the coelacanth was extinct. We had quite a lot of fossil evidence, and I believe it was thought that the coelacanth became extinct in the Jurassic, which I mean, it was so long ago. I mean, and just, I mean, that's an ancient animal.
That's tens of millions of what Jurassic, 60, 70 million years ago?
Yeah, something like that. And yeah, so we thought this was just another specimen from the fossil record. There were a number of species, and so there were some changes over time. But at a certain point, the fossil record for whatever reason dropped off, and I'm not sure if that was ever actually explained why it dropped off, and we didn't see like later fossils of them. But in either 36 or 46, I should know that, the curator of a small museum in South Africa, on the tip of South Africa, would go down to the docks every day. It was a natural history museum, so she would collect specimens of wildlife from the region, and she would go down to the docks every day and talk to the fishermen. And if they found something interesting, they got to know her, and they would show it to her, and they would just let her like look at their catch of the day. They would just take these big nets out there, so it was a whole assortment of species. And she just went down there one day and happened to see, her story goes anyway, that there was just this like bright brilliant blue iridescent fin like poking out from like underneath like a big pile of smaller fish. And she dug it out, and it turned out it was a coelacanth. So I mean, which is, I mean, to me it's almost like walking into some remote rainforest and having a dinosaur pop out at you. Like,
Yeah.
it's that ancient of an animal. And so yeah, I think since then that more have been caught, and I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think they finally captured like some live footage of them. I think they dwell like pretty deep waters, like off the continental shelf, and they finally captured them on video. I don't believe that they've ever been taken into captivity, but they're still out there. And the interesting thing about those, so a long time ago, I wrote a blog post just about the discovery of the fish. And I got like this crazy email from a guy who I guess had this woman, her name was Marjorie Latimer, who had known her. And he was essentially like contesting her story that she was the one who had found it. And she had passed away by that time. And I got this email in like literally like 36-point font, like bright red letters, like saying that like I didn't know what I was talking about. And so I did some digging, and turned out was kind of a notorious crank who, there was abundant evidence that she was the one who had discovered this animal. So I was like, oh, that's interesting that you would even have found me and that I had written about this.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that circumstance where people have called me out in many comment sections about my ability as a reporter to do my due diligence of research. And it can be, I remember the beginning of my career being really unnerved by that because
so I was panicked. Like I was like, what if I did screw this up? Like, like that's possible. Like I might have missed something.
It's hard because a lot of stories, you know somewhat about the subject matter, and then in a matter of weeks or months, you have to become an expert. And depending on the subject matter, can be extremely complicated, and you can do your due diligence, and you can even have editors do their due diligence, and you can still get called out. And it's something I think a lot of journalists, we share that experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, I wrote a story on polar bears, which if ever there was a lightning rod for people who want to, tell you that the polar bears are just fine and it's, there's nothing happening, or the opposite, because it was a story about how there was so much we didn't know about what was actually happening with the polar bear populations. So you got both ends of that. Usually you get one or the other, but sometimes you get like from both sides, and it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
So we occasionally have, while we're on the subject of the coelacanth, we occasionally have internal titles for stories that kind of float around that we use. And we had a kind of a fun one for yours.
Ooh, tough.
It was taken directly from your story, but internally our title for it was Goldfish Gone Wild.
I love that.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where we needed a placeholder and we hadn't come up with a title yet. It's usually one of the last things that happens in our editorial process.
Okay.
So it was just blank for so long, and we were talking about, okay, it's the Highland wild dog story or whatever, which you kind of trip over.
Right. Yeah, it's a mouthful.
And then all of a sudden I was like, well, it's just the Goldfish Gone Wild story, and
the line's in there, right? It's such a great line, and it stuck for us internally for a while until we came up with the title for the story.
Mm-hmm. For people that are watching that haven't read the piece yet, so the connection between the coelacanth and the Highland wild dog is that in a sense these dogs are, just as the coelacanth is, living fossils. So they're actually sort of living in this intermediate stage between, what we think of as a domestic dog and a wild dog. So they're kind of frozen in time a bit. Although it was interesting, I was thinking, thought about that. I was looking at one of the preprint servers this weekend, and there was an article that came out that was saying that coelacanths are not living fossils because they have evolved, since that time. But I'm pretty comfortable using that phrase in a colloquial sense. We know what living fossil means in that sense. So I wasn't too worried about that, but I thought that was kind of an interesting side note.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a way to illustrate the difference, like you said in the piece, between like a goldfish that has gone wild and this ancient creature, and that corollary with the dogs, that they're not just a wild domesticated dog, but this connection to an ancient lineage that goes back 11,000 years.
Yeah.
I love what Siv mentioned at the beginning about how this story challenges what we think we know about dogs, which are so familiar to us. I mean, I have a dog, and that, we had mentioned that assumption that dogs are descended directly from domesticated wolves, but also so many things that I just didn't know, this idea that these dogs can climb trees to chase their prey.
Right.
So
Yeah, and like they even have like they have an adaptation in the ankle joints of their back legs that allows the legs kind of like flip around.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
So that's part of what helps them climb the trees. And it's interesting too, because like a lot of the prey that they subsist on up there in the mountains is arboreal. Like they eat these tree kangaroos, a lot of birds, and other marsupials. And I mean, I'm sure there are ground dwelling animals there as well, but a lot of like the good stuff is up in the branches. So it made sense for them to head up there too.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. But it's weird for me to watch people walking their dogs and think about one just running up a tree.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like yeah, and because some of these dogs are in captivity. I believe there are about 200 of them. Some people do keep them as pets, and most of them that are in zoos are now in like smaller private zoos. Exactly because of this earlier sense that they like their kind of taxonomic uncertainty had led people to think, okay, maybe they're really not that important of an animal at all, and larger zoos stopped keeping them. I mean, I was lucky enough to see them at a zoo at San Diego Zoo maybe like 10, 12 years ago, and they no longer keep them. They think they gave their remaining dogs to a zoo in Palm Springs. But so, yeah, I mean, there is like a conservation element to this as well, that this research is really going to kind of help the bodies like the IUCN that determine whether animals get protections or not, will hopefully lead them in that direction.
Yeah, there's something that Sabine actually mentioned earlier in the conversation too, is how fickle our concern for animals can be, and how much of that depends on whether we think they're they're interesting or significant in a way. And when we're talking about it, we're guilty of that too with this story, right? What was exciting about this story to us was that these animals were significant and that they made this connection for us. But there are also people who love this animal regardless of that, even when they didn't think it was significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Apparently, like if they're trained well enough, they can make decent pets. But yeah, they really need some very, very specific conditions to be happy. Like they need a large like outdoor space for the most part. I think some people have kept them in apartments, but it's generally recommended that they have large outdoor space, and it needs to be like, I think they recommend something like a 14-foot fence because they're climbers. And they also have no recall. So meaning that, if they run away, like they're not going to come back if you shout their name. They're going to come back when they want to, if they want to.
Yeah.
Wow. Especially if they can chase the squirrels into the trees. I mean, there's no real reason. Right. I think of so many times when my dog has chased a squirrel and then given up because he can't climb the tree, and then he comes back. And we have tons of squirrels in our backyard. We have these trees, the huge canopies that kind of meet in the middle, and I guess it's a territorial battleground for squirrels because they have these amazing fights. They'll fall from one limb halfway down a tree and then grab on by a little claw. Right. But they have this relationship with our dog where they like to just chatter at him and make fun of him and just kind of say like, ha ha, ha, you can't get us. And I thought reading this story be very different interaction if there was a singing dog in the mix.
Right. They might not be quite so bold and taunting him if they knew there's a chance to get up there.
Well, and speaking of wild animals and domestication, that I recently learned that we had a neighbor who domesticated the squirrels, which is why some of them are just fearless around us.
Interesting. Yeah, there are squirrels that live in the tree outside my window as well, and man, those territorial battles are like loud. Like almost, it sounds like a bird almost. Like they like scream at each other.
Ooh, yeah.
They do. And they're ninjas. They're just, fighting. It's actually really exciting to watch the battles because they're happening in 3 dimensions.
Right.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So at the end of every Article Club session episode, Savani and I ask each other what our hopes are for this story as publishers. So we'll go first, but I'm also excited to have the author here.
Yes.
To lend your hopes for the story in. So Savani, as a publisher, as an editor, as a human, what are your hopes for this story?
I think this is often a hope for our stories that I have, but it's that the people take a closer look at the things around them, the things they think they know, right? And in this case, it could be as simple as taking a closer look at their pets and realizing that there's so much they don't know about this animal and its lineage and its history and evolutionarily where it fits into kind of that trajectory. And I often have this hope with our stories because I think we get really caught up in the things that seem so out of the ordinary that we often overlook the things that might seem too ordinary. And so that's my big hope for this story.
That's a hope I share for a lot of the pieces that we publish.
Absolutely.
For sure.
How about you, Sabine?
My hope for this story is that it's one of those pieces that really champions the badassery of researchers.
Yeah.
I think that there are so many things. It's like Richard said at the beginning of this, that we've mapped so much of the world, and a lot of people think that we've discovered most of what there is to discover. But there's so much waiting for us, and in places that are really challenging, specifically in places that are really challenging because we don't really go there often. I mean, who goes past the equatorial glaciers into the mists and the precipice and the cliffs to try and chase down an animal that may or may not still be out there? But there's so much excitement and adventure to that. And that idea of having an adventure story and a science story going hand in hand is always something that I love to see, and I'm always honored to publish.
Definitely. How about you, Richard? What's your hope for the story as the writer?
Yeah, well, I absolutely share all those hopes that you both expressed. Absolutely. I think I'll add to that I hope that this piece can serve to kind of raise the profile of this animal. And as I had made reference to before, because of its kind of uncertain taxonomic state, the New Guinea Highland wild dog doesn't really have any conservation protections anymore. It was delisted by the IUCN in 2019. And with this new research, I think they're going to be revisiting that. And there is now a dingo working group within the canine specialist group at the IUCN. So I'd like to see this animal's profile raised. Right before we got on the call, I saw there's this new conservation initiative that I think it's run through a foundation that is run by Ellen DeGeneres, and it's called the New Big Five, and they want to kind of like reframe like megafauna, like the big five of megafauna, and kind of put some new animals in the spotlight. And so I would like to see, if not, something exactly like that, I would like to see the Highland Wild Dog become more of a household name, and as a result, hopefully get some more conservation protections, facilitate further research on the dog, perhaps put a greater focus on like the other wild we just don't know very much about. I mean, I'm thinking even in like the past decade, I've seen maybe like 1 or 2 stories come out of there of wildlife that's up there, and we just don't know very much about it. So if in some small way I can push the conversation towards these animals that are kind of underappreciated and help them get the protections that they need and just help people know more about them, and I think hopefully fall in love with them kind of like I did.
It's great.
It really is. And hopefully this new research helps push these conservation efforts, but so does public opinion. Public opinion is so important in that.
Right.
And so, for those of you who are moved by this story, sharing it with friends and family and just spreading the word is a way that you can help garner that support and that public pressure.
Definitely. And for people who are excited about your work, Richard, who read the story and want to read more, where else can they go to learn and to read more of your work?
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity. Yeah, so I have a website. It's called richardpallardy.com, and it's pretty well, it's a work in progress, but it has most of my work linked on there and broken down by subject area. I'm on most social media, so people can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Yeah, and I always encourage people that have interesting stories or are curious about my work to reach out. I'm always happy to communicate with other people that love the natural world and are enthusiastic about learning more about it and protecting it.
Fantastic. And we also have a profile page for you on the Hidden Compass website where people can check out other articles you've written and your work and your bio. And we're so excited that we get to have these campaigns, these fundraising campaigns, where if our readers or anyone who's watching this is motivated by the cause of the story or the sheer artistry of the telling of the story or the person behind it, you have the opportunity to directly support this author and to help Richard continue to tell stories about parts of the world and perhaps animals and researchers who haven't gotten the spotlight before. And 50% of the proceeds also help support Hidden Compass and allow us to publish stories like this that are a little weird or a little different, a little quirky, very nerdy, and hit all the boxes that we love to hit.
Yes. So thank you very much, Richard, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for bringing us this story in the first place, because we enjoyed the process all the way throughout, but mostly we enjoy getting to learn about something new, and you brought us that. So thank you very much for that. And for our readers who are similarly excited about this story and who feel like they've learned something, contribute, share, and we will look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, Richard. It was great to have you.
Yeah.